much for joining the conversation and choosing to be a part of this campaign.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
For those who are watching this video, could you do a little bit of an introduction, what you do and a little bit about yourself?
So I am an engineer by training. I decided to do a fellowship back in when I was finishing college called the Teach for India Fellowship. And when we were teaching inside our classrooms, we saw that our students, the students we taught in these government schools, did not have access to the opportunity. And hence we needed to change the system, rebuild the system in a way that it served the children going into these schools better and at par with children going to some of the best schools, the best private schools in the country. The idea is to build a thriving school ecosystem where parents, teachers, and principals come together in service of the child and ensure that the child is ready for the world.
How has the last 6 to 8 months of lockdown been for you guys and people at the office, and especially the communities and the children that you guys work with?
For the communities and the children that we work with and the families that we work with, it has been a really difficult time. For the first few weeks, we were just focused on ensuring that they had the basic essentials. They were safe. Only once we got a grip over that situation is when we decided, okay, now it might be a good time to really look at what can we do to continue learning. We saw that as an opportunity to also share our vision for our students and our children, which is that they act in alignment of head, heart, hand, and soul in service of all beings. Over the last 5 or so months, we've seen some brilliant responses from our children, from other educators across the country who've been using our curriculum. And I think it's just heartening to see that we've been able to use this moment of challenge as a moment of opportunity.
Can you share a little bit about the kind of insights that you've had, from educators, from children who've sort of experienced this curriculum or this approach?
Parents have a much larger role, and parents can play a much larger role in the lives of our children if supported in a more structured way, which meets the parents where they are. And I think one of the biggest insights is that our parents did brilliantly well to support the children. It gave us that confidence that, if our parents can facilitate this, our teachers can do this even better. And the second insight, I think, which has happened is the power of individualized, customized feedback. What we noticed was every time a teacher gave individualized feedback to the child actually sent back or was motivated to send back more work. They were doing that on their own and sending it back. And I think that really shifted something within our teacher community as well, because they started seeing how valuable good feedback is for their children.
That is very interesting. Do you think teachers will be able to take this sort of practice back into the classroom, especially the way that we have experienced use of technology, teachers, parents, and other stakeholders? Do you think they'll be able to take the best practices back into the classrooms?
I think we must take them back to the classroom because we owe it to our children. We owe it to the young people we are working with. And I think just in terms of the best practice that has worked for us at SEF is that we looked at the education before we looked at the technology. We focused entirely on ensuring what do our children need right now. And once we had that out, that's when we then looked for how can we send this to the children. So I think the best practice that definitely we are taking forward in our schools, and we would urge everyone to take forward, is to look at the educational aspect of it, the pedagogy of it, before looking at the tool. With the whole edtech piece, I think that's becoming the problem. Like everyone has technology and that becomes the solution. Our children can't read not because there's a technology gap. They can't read because there's an education gap, there's a pedagogy gap.
You're right. I totally agree. I think looking at technology only as an enabler and not as a driver will certainly pull our focus back into the content and the approach of how we teach our children. One of the other interesting things that you said on Twitter that I want to talk about a little bit was what if everyone taught in a public school for a year? Elaborate a little bit on that idea, and then let's talk about pros and cons to that idea.
I think just this moment in the pandemic has shown us how teaching is something which is aspirational, and which is why I feel like ensuring that everybody or creating a structure where everybody gets time to spend inside a public school can be really transformational, because I think it potentially has that power to really shift your perspective about the world. And uh, and it's incredibly powerful, the responsibility of working with children, the challenges and the risks. I think in a world where pedophilia is real, cyberbullying is real, hate crimes, gender violence more real than ever, it is really difficult to allow anyone to walk into a classroom, because our children are like sponges, right? They soak up whatever they have around them. If you put in someone who is a hate monger, someone who does not believe in equal rights, in just the basic human dignity, putting them inside a classroom can have disastrous results. Those are like those spaces where I think the risks are way too high.
Our future, our country's future, the entire world just rests on young people. Then how did we fully miss the boat on the narrative that the job of teaching young people is the most important job in the country? Which brings me to the second point that you mentioned on your Twitter thread, and I want to talk about that a little bit. The piece about including SEL as part of the mainstream education that everybody's talking about and have been talking about for 2 decades now. People in the government, policymakers, funding organizations, implementing organizations. And yet there is a need for this conversation to continue to happen. And simply because we haven't been able to significantly move in this direction. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you see in this context.
So I think the first thing is definitely patience, because even if you look at the other more pronounced or more widely accepted needs of education, which is around foundational learning, it's taken us years to put that out in a policy. We need to ensure that we can constantly push for this conversation. The second thing, which I also feel, is that as adults who are in positions of power, we need to really believe in these things. This cannot be a gimmick. I actually refer to a lot of instances where governments have shown an amount of interest in bringing social emotional learning, or in bringing just overall in changing the philosophy of education. But they have, within those sort of spaces, they have actually not truly understood what it means to embed life skills in education. They have really created these siloed sort of systems where academics is a silo, social emotional learning is a silo, and sports education or physical education is a silo. And I think that's where the problem is. Hence, I feel like sometimes when our policymakers and when adults who are making these decisions, when they make it, they really need to try to understand these things in depth, or leave it to the ones who understand it. I think that's big challenge that I definitely see. That there is intention, but there is also that lack of that audacious courage. Other pieces also today, for most of the education space, the customers are not our children. If I use the traditional form of what customers are, like people who pay. So our parents pay in private schools, and the government pays in government schools. For non-profits, some other corporate or a donor pays. And because our children do not pay, we often don't listen to our children.
That is interesting. I think it's a simple and yet a very powerful way of measuring whether our programs are designed for the paying customer or for the actual customer. This point that you spoke about, where adults in power believing in the change, do you think that as adults, what we want for the education system to do to our children is mostly anchored in our own lived experiences? For example, because learning technology changed my life, I'm going to put my 6-year-old through a coding course. Now, that's possibly the most simplest and the most contextual example. But do you see any risks there?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. As individuals, what we see is this is what we went through. These are the challenges that we faced, and hence we want to build a system where those challenges do not exist. And we also need to understand that even though you run a for-profit or a not-for-profit, or you're a government, your responsibility as an educator is much larger than the bottom line of your company. And how do you constantly be aware of that? It's not about my idea, it is about what our children need.
There is either your idea or my idea. What is our idea? What is the idea?
I am fully unaware of
How
this.
to work together.
Together. What do you mean, our idea? It's either my idea or not my idea. Right? It's either
Absolutely,
my idea
yeah.
or your idea. Right? There is no our idea.
I think that over the last 4 or 5 decades, I think the one thing that our education systems definitely succeeded in doing is building a very strong competitive muscle in everybody who's passed through that system, who are now adults, right? And the narrative now we're taking to young people is that of collaboration and teamwork and being able to work with people and etc., right? And yet we are demonstrating a completely contradicting behavior, right? Um, so how do you think it affects them when they see this lack of integrity, if you will, in what adults are saying, in what adults are doing?
I think the same effect that all of us are feeling, right? We're utterly confused. We don't know how to like if you look at the I'm going to take a different example. If you look at the Me Too movement. After the Me Too movement, the first reaction that men had was they were afraid. They were not sorry. So literally we had a whole race of people who were befuddled with the idea that they had done something wrong, and that I can be a better person to not make the mistake, and I need to really look inside and change that. And if you look at it, I think one of the examples that I keep talking about a lot is a very well-intentioned social enterprise or a non-profit goes to apply for a grant. The third question in the grant application, the first question is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? How will you solve it? The third question is, how is your solution better than the others? And in that, this person who's come in with a supremely good intention to do well and this and that, you are pushing this person to think of how they're better than others, right? And you are sort of forcefully embedding this concept of competition. So I think one of my what ifs is, what if grant making organizations stopped asking how we are better and just asked us why we believed in the solution that we have for our children. And I think those are those systemic challenges, and some of the organizations who are asking these questions are also equally well intentioned. And which again goes back to what you said, right? The fact that we have this gap between what we are taught as young people and then what we are expected to be as adults, uh, then shows up in adults doing things horribly wrong, right? Because हमने like you said, right, हमने सीखा ही नहीं था. And for us, always moral science meant animals doing great things. A tortoise will never give up. I think we have enough human stories to talk about.
Yeah.
Talk about men and women and people of different genders doing great things.
This has been such an interesting conversation, Mainak. Thank you so much for your time. Any closing thoughts?
Thank you so much. I think for this, I think it's definitely an honor to be a part of the What If movement, and I think it's been a great learning experience for all of us at Simple Education Foundation. I think I want to end with one what if statement, which is, what if every child was noticed, acknowledged, and cared for in school and at home for who they are. And yeah, and that is my wish for the world.